Welcome back to Ask the Educator, a podcast for all professionals involved in medical device processing and sponsored by Healthmark Industries. The education team here at Healthmark has 280 years of combined experience in areas ranging from sterile processing, endoscopy, OR, biomed, to hospital and industry leadership. Our goal is to leverage our collective experience to answer one of your questions each episode, giving you the practical tips you need to succeed in the evolving world of device processing. My name is Kevin Anderson, clinical educator here at Healthmark, and I will be your host. Let's get started. Welcome back, everybody, to Ask the Educator. This is Kevin Anderson, your host, and with me again, I have Steve Kovach. We are going through what we refer to as the 10 factors of clean. And in this particular episode, we were going to talk about the instrument or the device that you're actually cleaning. So with that, Steve, welcome back.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, Kevin, the whole goal of this, again, is to try to stimulate and get people to think what they're doing in their practice and create conversation amongst themselves, their department, their peers. So one of the things when you think of an instrument or a device that's dirty or you have problems is you have to understand the design of it. And if you remember back in the one episode, Perkins did talk about you should know the instrument design. But if you got to think about it, you have such a diverse crowd that's now listening to these podcasts from all over the world. You just can't focus on surgical instruments. You could have a rural hospital that does infusion pumps, IV pumps, commodes, plus surgical instruments. So they have to know how to clean it, what to look for. And if you look at where we've evolved in the last 20, 30, 40 years and tie into what you said the other day about robotic arms, think back to the 50s and 60s. They were pretty much simple open surgery. The endoscope came about, but they weren't the real complex instruments. It wasn't until really the 70s with the space age and you got different polymers and plastics and titanium when complications started to arose. Laparoscopic surgery started with a 10 millimeter hole, and now it's single site through the umbilical cord, 2-3 millimeters. So the instruments are longer, narrower. There's tiny serrations. Those things are always going to be there. And, I try to break it up into two groups, Kevin. Either it's simple or complex. And people would say, well, Steve, that maybe is too basic. But there is an ISO document out there that I think it breaks it down into 15 or 16 different categories. But if you think of it, simple devices are without really any physical or challenging design features like osteotome, bone spikes, probes. And then everything else gets complex. So I don't know, am I breaking it down too simple there, Kevin, or?
No, I think that's a great start. I think, just hearing what you're saying about it, I would probably add one more category, and that would be modular, because there's complex devices that are all together. Like a robotic arm is one item, and yet it's very complex. But then you have sometimes simple items that are actually modular, and then you have to understand that it's an actual take-apart instrument. So it's like a step sort of in between. I think of the new laparoscopic instruments that come apart into 2 or 3 pieces, or the cutting jigs inside of a total knee tray that come together and that we have to remember to take apart afterwards. All of those things. We even had a simple screwdriver. It was a cannulated screwdriver for a spine set. Looked like just a regular screwdriver, but it takes apart, and it's one of those things you have to be cognizant of in order to adequately process it.
Yeah, I like where you brought up this modular, because I'll focus for a second on MIS instruments. When they first came out, they just were non-ported and hard to clean. And then they evolved to having a little port. And now they're what you've sort of talked about. You got to take them apart, a shaft, the handles, and you need to know that. And you know what? This sort of gets back to the IFU, which gives you the direction. But then, I mentioned this other factor of cleaning, it's training of your staff. And they have to know how to take it apart or what to do. And that training is important. And if they don't have that, the device might not be clean and functional. And then they're calling Kevin, the manager or director or supervisor, up. Kevin, come on down to room 9 and blah, 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 And so it's understanding how it's designed and how it's evolved. And this also there's another simple thing I'm going to word this differently is, a lot of people, there's fiber optic cords. And a lot of people, fiber optic cords have to be hand washed. Well, when they come through the pass-through window, sometimes you'll see people take alcohol or HLD and they'll wipe the cord down and it's silicone. Well, a lot of optical cords, when you read the IFU and you train your staff, they say you're not supposed to wipe it down or use certain chemicals because it can be absorbed in that cord and then through the sterilization process or something else can cause problems. So they have to know the design of it and the material. And it's just very important. And you see how these factors sort of start to overlap, Kevin?
Absolutely.
And when you, as a manager, would figure a problem out, you're doing a lot of these things. Did I train the staff? Or maybe somebody was off for a couple months and you talked about an orthopedic modular set. Maybe you had the in-service and they forgot to go read it and they're in decontam and they didn't know it had to come apart or whatever. So they've got to understand the design of it and then put all those other pieces together. That's how I look at it. That's why I think design of the instrument is so important.
Yeah, like you said, design of the instrument, and then you start to get into this blended area with the IFUs and the competency of the staff. I'm thinking of a very specific example when we were talking about the modular laparoscopic instruments. We got our first few, and I'll tell you, the IFU came into play. I was talking to the vendors of multiple different instrument companies, and I said, look, it's going to have to be an instrument that is approved to be sterilized while it's in the put together position. Like it can't be only sterilized as all the components separate, because I know my OR and I know that they're going to have a hard time with it. And it's just another group of people that will have to train on it. And sure enough, we still had people put them in the trays totally taken apart, and then the OR would get them and they'd be like, what am I supposed to do with this? The scrub tech's like, I don't even have a clue how to put this thing back together. And they are a little bit tricky, some of them. So you can see how the pieces go together, but they still have to click in place in a certain order to actually function. So all of those factors, they do come together, but that complexity of the device, those 3 different levels that we talked about, I think are a great way to think about them all. And then that helps you when, you're deciding what to buy, you're deciding how to train. That's how these things all come into play.
Yeah. Yeah. You were saying something, and I'm going to share a story. I know I'm a little older than a lot of people listening, but there used to be this company called Surgeon's Choice, and you had to put a TA stapler and an EA. They were all stainless steel. And if you didn't match them up right and put them in the tray, they couldn't do it. And that's exactly what you're talking about, is if it's got to be reassembled, that increases OR time and complications. So that's a real good moment for people to think about as they're doing their request for proposals. So I want to leave with this other little tidbit. We talked about people should have Perkins as a book. There's another book, or it's a pamphlet, and it's from Germany, and it's called AKI Red Book. I don't know if you have one.
Never heard of it.
Well, I'll send you the link. It's free. I think it's its 12th or 13th edition. This is an unbelievable free resource, again, that people should have in their department. And the manager, and since it's free, you can put it online, and they go through the different classifications of instrument and talk about stains and all this different information, but I want to leave your listeners that it's AKI Red Book. They just Google search it and pull it up. You can get a free download. They also have it for veterinary instruments, and they have it for dental instruments. So there's a red book, green book, and yellow book. So I want to hand it off to our German CSSD partners out there that they've come up with this wonderful reference book, and it is free, Kevin. So again, people need to understand the design of the device, and there's mixed metals now, how they interact with each other in a tray. So that design is very important. And to the people designing instruments out there, Kevin, I've heard you speak and everybody else, they focused on the physicians, mostly how does it look and feel. They need to come down to reprocessing and ask us, how do we clean it? What does it do? How does it impact us? Because that design might work for the physician, but it adds work for us. And if they could work together, they'll have a better product and maybe better outcomes.
I think that's a great point that you just made. It's clear that their focus is mostly on either the surgeon or the design to make it more minimally invasive, but having a device that has all the players in mind, including the cleaning and processing side, is the best idea. I mean, having a device that you can adequately clean and sterilize each and every single time, and even preventive maintenance to a high standard. I mean, all of these things come into play. So I think those are great points that we discussed. I hope that our listeners agree, and I hope it gets some people thinking out there and helps to provide some level of direction when it comes to categorizing their instruments and really paying close attention to the different types that are out there.
Yeah, Kevin. Well, again, I don't know when we're going to pick up the next time, but I'll look forward to it because I know you got quite a few people who've been wanting to join your show. So we'll pick this up the next time you're available and I'm available. And I thank you for wanting to talk about these different factors over the next many months or whatever. And again, you're doing a great job. And thanks again for the opportunity, Kevin.
All right. Thank you, Steve. And thank you to all our listeners out there. Please remember, if you have anything, any feedback, or even just some comments you want to make about some of the things that we're talking about, please send us an email, asktheeducator@hmark.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much. Just to recap this episode, Stephen and I talked about another one of the 10 factors of cleaning, which was the device. So what device are you trying to clean? Is it simple, complex, or maybe it's modular? The device design is just one of the 10 factors that play into our cleaning process. And for the manufacturers out there that may be listening, when designing medical devices, we need to keep in mind the need to clean and process for reuse. I want to thank you all for listening, and please subscribe to our podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. All opinions expressed on this show are those of the presenters. Before using any medical device, it is important to review the device manufacturer's instructions for use.